The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 long years, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Dear people of God, the passage from Isaiah chapter 58 could be summarized as, don't be terrible to poor people, and your life will be blessed. The people of Israel were seeking God's blessings for themselves, while simultaneously causing those around them to suffer. If people were working for them, they would make their job tedious and exacting. They were indifferent to the suffering of others. The hungry they would let starve, the homeless they would let die, the naked they would do nothing for. If they saw a fellow human being in need, someone of their own flesh and blood, they did not do what they could to help them. Or they were the instigators into why these people were suffering. In response, God sounds his voice like a trumpet through the prophet Isaiah. And he said, "If you remove the yoke from among you, the mocking finger and vicious speech, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise like the dawn of the dark, and your gloom be like the noonday." A yoke, that's a beam of wood put on animals to do heavy labor. Put poetically, a yoke is any heavy burden that is too hard for someone to bear. There's a certain hypocrisy in wanting God's blessings, the things that free us from heavy burdens, while at the same time doling out yokes on others. This passage is a call for consistency. Those who serve God also are to serve their neighbor, removing their yokes. There are many in this world who wear the name Christian like a fine robe, but are quite curved in on themselves. Everything they do is done for their own benefit. To be in control, they are quick to shame others. Their words they use to tear people apart. Instead of untying people from their bondage, they make sure to tighten the rope. However, God is not in the business of putting people down in subjugation. God's interest is in setting people free. Setting people free is what God asks of us as well. In fact, it is the norm that God helps one person by means of another. So if we see a person who is thirsty and we refrain from giving them a drink although we could, and that person dies of their thirst, we are at fault for their death. For we have withheld our love by which their life could be preserved. Here it is important to talk about the nature of Christian faith. We are justified by faith apart from works. Faith is a power given us by God. Faith means to have confidence in God, that God is gracious. Faith alone takes hold of God's grace and forgiveness of sin that we have through Jesus Christ. And it is faith alone that God counts as righteousness. For we do not produce a righteousness of our own, but in faith we receive a righteousness that comes from beyond ourselves, the righteousness of Christ. It is true, until the day we die, we fail left and right to love our neighbors as ourselves. But because we have been given the Holy Spirit through faith, our hearts will be moved to do good works, to do good deeds for others. We will be moved to remove the heavy wooden beams off the shoulders of others, to feed the hungry, to uplift those who are smashed down by life. Now, does God want to motivate us to love our neighbor by making loving the neighbor itself a heavy burden? Not at all. Faith active in love is light as a feather. The faith God has given you will love the neighbor freely, spontaneously, with a cheerful heart. Faith will not and cannot be idle. It will always seek to do what is beneficial to others, not under compulsion, not out of fear or shame or guilt, but willingly. And keep in mind that this is all done by God's gracious power at work within us. God both commands and fulfills. He is the one at work in you. Now, one might be led to think that by loving and serving our neighbor, we are bringing ourselves into God's grace and favor. One might think that loosing the bonds of wickedness and untying the yoke is the way we get closer to God, that we get God to accept us. This is not so. There is no ladder to climb. You don't need to go up to find God, because in Jesus Christ, God has already come down to find you. And God does not find you out of thin air, but out of thick air. God finds you by speaking to you through another person. And through another person, he frees you with his word. He says, through the death and resurrection of Christ, you are mine. You are my heritage. As far as the east is from the west, I have removed your sin. I break apart the yokes that keep you down. I set you free from all your heavy burdens. I will keep you like a watered garden. I will strengthen your bones. I will lift you out of your sorrow and feed you with my life-giving word. Then you, my child, will bloom